Hi, this is kind of like a mind dump for my autistic brain. I am 36 years old and I was diagnosed with autism only 2 years ago, coming up to 2 years. Um, it's very tiring masking as a normal functional adult. Um, it's an incredibly lonely experience being autistic and being able to present as a relatively normal human being. Um, this is not so much about self pity, it's more about not having anyone to talk to. So I'm talking to the ether, to whatever's out there. 36, that's my age. Um, Good number. It's divisible by 3, 2, 6, 9, 10, as random as it is. This is just more of an opportunity to just get the most random and abstract thoughts out, I guess. But would otherwise kind of not really have anywhere to go. Um, I have 3 children, of which they all may also be on the spectrum. They have difficulty understanding their emotions, understanding other people, um, but they're not yet diagnosed. Twins who are 10, and a younger daughter who is 7, all girls. Um, I suppose one of the most difficult things for me, that is probably a product of my autism, is brevity. Talking concisely, uh, being confident to just say what I want to say. I'm constantly worried that I'm not going to be understood correctly, um, or that I may have said the wrong thing. What's, I suppose, most difficult part of that is when you are able to hide these worries, these multiple channels of thought that are happening at the same time. It, Nobody knows, right? Everybody just assumes I'm well spoken, up together, I articulate myself well, probably. Um, yeah, I mean, this is weird for me because I don't use social media. I don't like to video call. I don't really speak to my family outside of my household. I phone my dad, I phone my mum, but I don't really feel comfortable on the phone. Um, I don't really like to talk to myself. I believe in superstition. Quite a logical person, atheist in nature, and so I don't really believe in luck, only in the sense that it's what you make it. You provide yourself with opportunities and take opportunities away based on the decisions you make. Um, just quite a calculated and orderly way of thinking in a world that is quite chaotic and isn't really built for autistic minds. Understandably, the world should be built around the majority in order to function correctly. But it's just tiring. Um, Something as simple as walking down the road to pick up your kids from school and nobody even slightly makes the effort to make way, when you feel that you're constantly stepping right to one side and gesturing to make sure you being polite and well mannered, smiling, making eye contact, saying hello when reciprocation isn't necessarily there. Nor should it be, but it's so almost what I want to do sometimes. It's just be in my own little world, not worry about what people think. But for me, it's like I have half a dozen trains of thought all at the same time. I'm, if I was to engage in a conversation with someone, I am, even if it's for a split second beforehand, I am pre planning what I'm saying. I'm playing out the conversation in my head. I'm performing, I suppose. But I'm myself as well. I'm being myself, but I'm also having to put effort into that. It's not, it's fluid and instinctive, perhaps it's the right way of putting it. Um, it's mirror people as well. So I'm really from East London. I've cockney dad. Uh, Grew up around geezers, blokes, in a diverse mixed race community, all different walks of life. Uh, there was as many people who didn't look like me as there were that did look like me. Um, a melting pot of cultures, most of which did not actually integrate well with one another, but nonetheless, a variety of cultures. And I don't know if that made it harder as a kid. I mean, I didn't know I was autistic, but I didn't naturally fit in. But at the same time, my friend groups were from every walk of life: Middle East, Africa, Eastern European, brown, white, black. Didn't matter. I was friends with everybody. In fact, it's probably more common to have friends who were less conventional to my typical upbringing. But then my stepmom is a lovely black woman from Barbados who immigrated in the 60s. Um, I had like a wide collection of friends from all different walks of life, backgrounds, British born immigrants. Um, but it didn't matter really where people were from, whether they looked like me or not. I always felt like I was looking from the outside in, almost like a spectator. Now, again, this sounds very self-pitying, and it's not. It is what it is. I don't feel sorry for myself or wish it was any other way, but it's just an observation. I feel, even now as I do this, a little bit egotistical, maybe arrogant. I don't know. But yeah, it's just a sort of, again, a soundboard for myself, but also if anybody does watch it, maybe a different insight into what autism is like. Um, a lot of people are exposed to the stereotypical kind of Rain Man idea of a very robotic talking individual who can't make eye contact, um, who doesn't know the right cues to speak, and is a mathematical genius. I was good at math when I was younger; it came very naturally to me. Um, but it is a spectrum in the medical sense. It's a vast array in which this neurodiversity can present itself. One thing I have noticed, especially in my adult life, is a lot of the people I have tended to gravitate towards and become friends with, this before my diagnosis, I would probably describe as not being neurotypical. So perhaps like-minded people gravitate to one another. Um, yeah, and I suppose one way to just a word that was used to describe me once was sensitive, and I used to think that was almost derogatory, especially being a guy. This social expectation of being tough and emotionally strong. But when it was described me as being sensitive, it was described in almost like a scientific explanation for how my brain works, and it kind of makes sense. I'm sensitive to touch. I'm sensitive to sound. I'm sensitive to bright lights. Um, it's a real physical thing about my body, and it also would make sense that it would be about my mind emotionally. I feel a lot of empathy. Um, I can watch a film and I can burst into tears at moments that may not necessarily trigger others to get so upset. Um, I'm moved quite easily by powerful lyrics and songs. I'm quicker to anger, especially when I feel misunderstood. Um, it's probably one of my biggest character weaknesses is regulating my behavior with my emotions. I recently learned in the last couple of years that you can't control your emotions, which actually makes sense because when you try to do so, you typically express the result in anger. And more aptly put, I was told you can manage how you behave, and that's like a skill, I suppose, which we teach children, and hopefully for adult life, as you mature, it becomes easier. But it isn't so easy, I think, for me. That's not an excuse. I think it's just a honest observation. Um, Perfect example. I was driving in my car and I drove calmly and slowly past someone who was walking really slow across the road, and there was no indication that I was even anywhere near driving near them. But as I drove past them, they shook their head at me. They obviously had a different viewpoint about what was happening. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fully stop. I was nowhere near them, didn't do anything, didn't break any rules of the road, but that random interaction with a stranger 4 or 5 days ago, shaking their head, will stick with me and it will stress me out. And often I feel frustrated and angry about those small interactions in every aspect of life. Um, like now, it's 4 in the morning. I'm tired, um, but I feel like I've hit a wall. Uh, my wife was frustrated because we was shopping in the high street, but to me and the kids, we just wanted to get away from it. We just wanted to go home and go through it as quick as possible. It was not an enjoyable experience. Well, I mean, it's not something we hate, but I don't think I appreciated how much my wife just wanted to window browse. And she mentioned her frustrations, and I think I realised that I don't have anyone in my phone I could pick up and really talk to. And it is probably a form of depression in the state of mind that I'm in and I can be in. And they say neurodiversity is linked to genetics. Well, my dad suffers with depression. He has OCD. I have OCD. I never lived with my dad growing up, so it wasn't a learned habit either. Just happened to have the same traits, same difficulties, and the same struggles. Um, I didn't really know my grandparents except my nan on both sides, and my dad and my mum both suffered with mental health issues. Whether that's severe depression, manic depression in the case of at least one nan, um, or bipolar-like personality traits. Um, my nan's passed. Both all my grandparents have long since passed away, but sometimes wonder if they were autistic, at least my mum's mum was. And what would it look like being an autistic woman in the 1920s? Probably just be a crazy woman who's needs sorting out or something like that. That's how archaic it could be in the olden times for overly emotional women, as it would be framed then. This is a good example, actually, of just sort of going off on a tangent, like in brevity, going on a rant. I think the main reason for doing this, and a point I'm kind of working towards, is that I feel lonely. Might seem weird. I've got a wife and 3 beautiful children. I love them dearly, and I wouldn't change anything for the world. And it's nothing of a shortcoming from them. My loneliness is it's a persistent feeling of loneliness that I've had for as long as I can remember. It's it's tied into feeling, like I said earlier, like I'm doing something wrong, or I'm letting people down, or I just don't fit in. Again, it's like having disassociation with oneself. I can picture and paint the scene of my 6-year-old birthday, skipping along happily and being told to stop skipping because I was 6. That's clearly stuck with me. Didn't understand what I did wrong. Like a conflict between what masculinity is supposed to be, being a geezer, being tough. That's a generational thing as well, I suppose, from previous generations. Lack of resilience, which is quite common in this generation and across the board anyway. But something in particular, perhaps, that I lack right now in my life, despite having seemingly forged it quite well for the first 30 odd years. It's funny, once that infrastructure breaks down, the foundations fall apart. Realize that it's stilts on top of stilts. That tall tower of resilience is actually one strong storm away from falling down. I hate analogies. I hate these pseudo elements of wisdom, such as life is too short. Yeah, but it is true in the sense that I've struggled more now in the last couple of years than I ever have. But I know myself better than I ever have as well. So there's pros and cons. Like I'm dealing with things in ways I wouldn't have done before because I have this diagnosis, which allows me to explain, not make an excuse for, but explain why I should or shouldn't do certain things, or how much exposure I should allow myself to certain things. So before this diagnosis, I might have been in a local supermarket like Asda and eventually just like a kettle simmering, eventually just blowing my top and being just really angry. Perhaps somebody didn't have the right manners, or the my daughter was crying in a way that I couldn't handle, and I would be frustrated with her. It wouldn't be her fault. And then since my diagnosis and understanding, again, I don't necessarily like using these words because of the negative association with the modern day world we live in, but the triggers which would start setting me off or elevating my emotions in certain areas. Um, and I know and I'm self aware of when they're happening in the moment, which is kind of weird. Um, but I'm able to sort of take a step back and be like, hey, I'm getting overwhelmed here. Like, and the anger levels are a lot lower than they were before. Um, or maybe it's not so much the anger levels are lower, although they are. I do think they are. The ability to behave with that amount of pent up anger is better than it was before, I think. Um, External observers might disagree. Um, Another thing, I suppose, about being autistic, and a term I don't know if it's I don't think it's really recognised medically, but a term they call high functioning autism, which is probably what I would fit into categorically, is high intelligence, which always feels arrogant saying, but I understand things pretty quick, at least up to a certain point. I'm really good at problem solving. Um, I see a lot of information which others may not see, but it doesn't always equate into being better, right? Like, ah, I don't know. It's, again, the stereotypical being better at maths because, like the Rain Man sort of stereotyping. Oh, you can count cards or whatever it is. Well, I mean, for every benefit in one aspect of brain power, there is potentially a negative that comes with it. So I said I was quite observant. That means I'm potentially overly observant. I have high anxiety. I see the potential for things to go wrong that may never go wrong. I stop my children running on concrete because statistically and probability wise, they're probably going to trip and then graze themselves and hurt their knee, which is an avoidable thing because if they just run slower or only run on grass, they'll be less likely to get hurt, right? Or I could never go to places like nightclubs without feeling like one of the security guards, seeing potential threats, seeing rowdy behaviour happen an hour before it happened from, I would guess, right, that's going to happen, it would happen. And that's another big thing is predictions, um, especially when you have OCD, like I have had for at least since I was 6, as long as I can remember, at least. OCD is a lot of it's about predictions, but you have this like logical part of your mind where your intelligence goes, hey, that's not likely to be a problem at all. And then you have this emotional part which just often overpowers that logical part, like checking if the door's locked 4 or 5 times. Any double digit IQ individual would know that the door was locked at least after the second time of checking. But when you have OCD, it's an emotional override. You no longer think in words, you just think in feelings, chemicals, override the logic. Um, so I have sensitive hearing. I can hear things pretty well. pick up things other people can't hear. But then I have sensitive hearing, so I don't like loud noises or tinny music coming through small phone speakers. It just feels like somebody's scratching the nails on a blackboard in my head. Um, I, I mean, this is becoming quite a monologue, really. Um, but I think I've struggled the last couple of years, and since my diagnosis came, I would describe after a breakdown, which happened shortly after COVID took full effect. And there was a number of things, but I think when you're autistic and you're again high functioning autistic, to use that term again, you succeed in your social interactions. I do, based on predictions and using data. I see the world as data, information. And so this is a really rudimentary, basic explanation, but if somebody smiles and says hello, almost like a coding language, you see behavior and then what its likely intended meaning is and what the likely intended response would be. So like, oh, hey, hey, hi, yeah, hi, hi. And you would behave accordingly. And I know we all do that anyway, but it's trained, I think, in most people instinctively. Um, like I said, it's like almost like a buffer with me, where I'm constantly, for almost a split second, from I have better trained responses than others. Um, but the world's always made sense based on conventional values and behaviors. And this is my like a brevity again, but this is my point. The world's changed a lot, I think, at least in our first world privileged bubble. Um, there's a lot more conflict, a lot more angst and frustration and inherited injustices and faults with people. And again, this is not self pity, but what once was an easy to read situation becomes now a more complicated and harder one to read because the social norms have changed so quickly in the last 5 years. I was quite successful working for Apple as one of the tech experts, pretentious naming system, I know. Geniuses, experts, pros. It was just a retail job. I liked it, helping people fix phones, solve technical issues. I was good at it. But then COVID happened, and the social justice storm crept in, and I was going to work, and it was no longer about work. It was about the way I looked, what sex I was, um, what background I had. And people around me were apologizing for things they had no control over. I would be told I had white privilege and didn't know what it was like for people of certain backgrounds. This is while no one knows that I have a mum that's black, for example. Um, and this is contradictory in the world that I'd understood and grown up understanding. And that's quite difficult. Because it was easier when you just held the door open for the person behind you and it was good manners. Before it becomes some privileged or patriarchal kind of problem. Now, I know these problems aren't real, but like I said before about someone shaking their head at me while I'm driving past them, these things aren't so easy to let go for someone like me. It does feel like an excuse in some respects, but again, I see the world as like a data sheet information. And there's a lot more of it I just can't understand. I can't understand the rhetoric around XYZ. I can't understand the conflict from one group to another. Can't understand the illogical statements from one news source or another news source. I really struggle with social media. YouTube being the only social media I really use. I don't really class messaging apps like WhatsApp and Discord as social media because they're just tools like text messages for me to speak to people I know. But I don't use Twitter, X. I never have used Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. I don't even think I've ever downloaded the apps. Use Facebook half a dozen times in 15 years. But in the flip side, I'm overly engaged in the comment section on YouTube. But then I loved YouTube when it was just the Backdoor Boys, two Asian guys miming to Backstreet Boys in their living room, or Smooth McGroove covering video game music in a cappella style, and this real sense of individuals just expressing themselves. Now it's turned into, for the most part, a beast of a corporation. Again, I'm digressing, but I 99% expect to get 0 views on this. I don't even know how I will upload this if I want people I know to see it. If I don't want to tell anyone I know that I've done it. I've always had friends I can count on one hand throughout my life, whether it was 6, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. My social circle has been small. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe I'll make a new channel. I'm not telling anyone about it. But I'll finish off just with things I like. I absolutely adore and love video games. Some of my most fondest memories growing up are sitting in my room by myself playing on my Super Nintendo, my Master System, playing with my friends from school on my N64, completing Final Fantasy games on my PS1, moving into the eras thereafter. Studied game design at university. Didn't turn up for my final exam. Pretty weird. I really like anime, although the more popular something gets, I think the more I naturally sort of steer away from it. And I really liked anime when I was the only one I knew who watched it, and now it feels as big and commercial as I was describing YouTube. There are so many different animes with so many different hype trains around each one, but I loved Naruto, Shippuden. I adore One Piece. Hajime no Ippo is one of the funniest things ever made, as is Gintama, Slam Dunk, Initial D, Dragon Ball Z in the 90s. Recent years got into Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of weird, but then kind of makes sense as an autistic adult. I mask. And Dungeons and Dragons is kind of about role playing, and you get to create this character that gets to behave in certain ways. I often joke that I think I would have enjoyed doing acting because it feels like I'm always acting. Even now, I've conscious about how I'm presenting myself. I don't want to sound like an idiot. I don't want to sound self-absorbed. I don't want to sound full of self-pity. But at the same time, I don't feel too judgmental for those who are really struggling as well. It's one rule for me, different rule for them. Um, but yeah, it's 4:30. I'm tired. Kind of every day at the moment feels like 4:30 all the time. Constantly tired. My body's become sore and constantly tense and in pain in the last couple of years. I used to be a personal trainer, super fit. One of my dreams was to compete on Sasuke, which is the original Japanese ninja warrior. Uh, but now I'm unable to do any raw exercise for pain. So my current combination of all of my interests and personality traits are all funneled into Rocket League. That's like my thing at the moment. I love Rocket League. It's a sport. It's an e-sport strategy. It's a computer game. It's it's my current big hobby. And yeah, maybe I'll do another one of these next time I can't sleep, even if no one listens. Um, if anyone did, they found it interesting, drop a message. My name's Mike. Take care.